Now, at this point, Descartes starts a new theme, and he does this by kind of following up on his argument about the senses. He says, let us assume for the sake of argument we're dreaming, and in such particulars as these are not true, that we are opening our eyes, moving our head, and extending our hands. In other words, maybe everything based on our senses that we believe, like that we are sitting in front of the fire right now, or you, wherever you are, that you're looking at this screen and in whatever room you're in, that could be a dream. Okay, let's assume that that's a dream, so we're actually wrong about that. He says, perhaps, sort of, again, making the same point, perhaps we do not even have such hands or any body at all. Nevertheless, it surely must be admitted that the things seen during slumber are, as it were, like painted images, which could only have been produced in the likeness of true things, and that therefore at least these general things, eyes, hands, body, etc., are not imaginary but are true and exist. And here he then refers to painters. Painters can represent mythical creatures, imaginary creatures, like, for instance, a eagle with the head of a lion, creatures that don't really exist, or unicorns, horses that have a horn coming out of their heads. Painters can represent these things, but they can only represent them because they are based on real things. That is, because there really do exist unicorns, and there really do exist horses, and there really do exist horns of the type that's drawn on a horse's head when one draws a unicorn. And there really do exist lions, and there really do exist eagles. So it's possible to combine these things in an image only because they're based on things that are real. And maybe dreams are like that, okay, we're dreaming this stuff, we're assuming for the sake of the argument that we're dreaming these things and they're not real, but don't they have to be based on something real? Doesn't there have to be some elementary component of them that is real? And even if it's not things as big as like heads of lions or bodies of eagles, it at least has to be something like the colors that things are painted in. So what Descartes is arriving at here with this process of reasoning is he's going to suggest that maybe there's something about sort of the very most elementary components of our sensory experience, the kind of very basic building blocks of our sensory experience, that is indubitable, or that is something that we can trust, or that we can be certain about. And now he says something a little bit funny. So this passage might not make a whole lot of sense to you from a contemporary standpoint, but I want to try to explain why Descartes thinks this way, and basically, what he's getting at or what he's trying to say. He says this class of things, of basically the sort of atomic elements or most basic elements of our sensory experience, appears to include corporal nature in general, that is, the nature of things with bodies, or the nature of the stuff that we experience or see as physical stuff, together with its extension, meaning it's taking up space, the shape of extended things, their quantity, that is their size and number, as well as the place and the time where they endure, and the like. So he thinks that the sort of atomic components of our sensory experience are things like distance, quantity, number, shape, place, time. And these atomic elements are ones, he goes on to say, that are studied in disciplines like arithmetic and geometry, in kind of pure math, whereas disciplines like physics, astronomy, and medicine are dependent on what he calls composite things. So the idea here is arithmetic and geometry are concerned with, as it were, the smallest elements, the sort of most basic elements and patterns in our sensory experience, whereas physics, astronomy, and medicine are more like paintings that include like heads of eagles and heads of lions and bodies of eagles. They're more about composite things, not just the simplest things. So if that's the analogy, that like arithmetic and geometry are more like kind of the paints, the colors out of which paintings are composed, whereas physics, astronomy, and medicine are more like the larger images, the composite images that are made out of those colors, okay, then maybe we do have enough reason to be confident that at least arithmetic and geometry are certain. At least the, things like 2 plus 3 making 5, or a square not having more than 4 sides. Those things that we can tell, that we can see, as it were, directly about the elementary components of our sensory experience. That when we look at 2 things and then 3 things and line them up together and see that they make 5, or we just look at a square and we can see that it has 4 sides, those kind of elementary components of our sensory experience are things perhaps that we can't possibly doubt, that are absolutely certain. What he's considering, in other words, is that perhaps something like logic and math, the very most elementary components of our reasoning or our experience, perhaps those things are indubitable. The kind of elementary, most basic, seemingly undeniable patterns of relation between things. Maybe those things are things that we can be absolutely certain about. So he's now going to look at that set of beliefs, basically everything based on logic and math, on what he'll later call clearly and distinctly perceived relations between ideas. Now, he almost immediately presents a reason why he can't be absolutely confident, even in logic and math. He says, "Be that as it may, there is fixed in my mind a certain opinion of long standing, namely that there exists a God who is able to do anything, and by whom I, such as I am, have been created. How do I know he did not bring it about that there is no earth at all, no heavens, no extended thing, that is, nothing even that takes up space, no shape, no size, no place, and yet bringing it about that all these things appear to me to exist precisely as they do now." So maybe even those very basic elements that he formerly said, maybe those things have to exist. Now he's saying, well, maybe even those basic elements are just kind of illusions created by a God, that there's some all-powerful God that, leads me to believe that there are certain things, but actually made the world in such a way that none of those things exist. And a way to represent this in our diagram is to point out that in order for us to have confidence in logic or math, in the correctness of what, at least logically or in a very elementary sense, seems to us that it must be the case based on patterns in our experience, in order for us to have confidence in that, we would have to believe that God isn't deceiving us about those things. And since God is all-powerful, God has the power to deceive us about those things. So a foundation of logic or math is belief in a God that doesn't deceive us. And that means that when we're questioning all of our beliefs, we need now to look at what reason do we have to believe that there's a God who doesn't deceive us, okay? So that belief is more foundational than the logic or math belief. It's as it were a prerequisite of being able to be confident in logic or math. Descartes goes on to say, "Moreover, since I judge that others sometimes make mistakes in matters that they believe they know most perfectly, may I not in like fashion be deceived every time I add 2 and 3, or count the sides of a square, or perform an even simpler operation, if that can be imagined?" So his point there is that even with mathematical reasoning and logic, sometimes people make mistakes. Even just looking at a diagram and counting sides, sometimes there's something about it that people make a mistake about. So it's possible that I'm making mistakes about those things too. He goes on to say, "But perhaps God has not willed that I be deceived in this way, for he's said to be supremely good. So if there is a supremely good God, then that suggests that I wouldn't be deceived about logic and math. However," Descartes goes on to say, "nonetheless, if it were repugnant to his goodness to have created me such that I be deceived all the time, it would also seem foreign to that same goodness to permit me to be deceived even occasionally." But we cannot make this last assertion, okay? In other words, I do sometimes make mistakes, as do others, even about things like math and logic. So if it were somehow contrary to the goodness of God to allow me to be deceived to allow me to ever be deceived, then it would seem like I shouldn't be deceived in these cases either. So, sorry, I should put it this way. If it were contrary to the goodness of God to always make me deceived, then it would seem also to be contrary to the goodness of God to make me ever be deceived. But we know that I am sometimes deceived, so it seems like it can't be contrary to the goodness of God, right? Or else maybe God isn't all good. Something has to give here, okay? So in other words, he's giving a reason here at the end of the paragraph to think that even if there were a good God, I still could be deceived in my beliefs about math and logic. So these are reasons to be suspicious of the truth or correctness of things based on math and logic. Now, some of you may already have been thinking as we're going through this argument, well, I don't believe in God. I don't think, I don't believe in God, so this argument doesn't apply to me. I can believe in math and logic just fine. I don't think it's that easy, and Descartes doesn't either. Descartes says, perhaps there are some who would deny so powerful a God, then believe that everything else is uncertain. Let us not oppose them. Okay, so in other words, he's saying some people might say, look, you say that maybe God is deceiving us about math and logic, but I don't believe in God, or I think we shouldn't believe in God. So no problem, right? We can believe in math and logic. Descartes says, not so fast. Let us grant that everything said here about God is fictitious. Okay, now they suppose that I came to be what I am either by fate or by chance or by a connected chain of events or by some other way. So whatever way it is you say that you and your mind came to be, maybe it's a process of evolution, it's just a kind of natural process with no God involved. However it is you say that you came to be, okay? He goes on to say, because deceived and being mistaken appear to be a certain imperfection, the less powerful they take the author of my origin to be, and say it's just nature, that's clearly less powerful than God. God is all powerful, okay? The less powerful you take the author of my origin to be, the more probable it will be that I am so imperfect that I'm always deceived. So the point there is, suppose that you don't believe in God, you just believe we came about by some kind of natural process or by evolution, then how do you know that we're not deceived all the time? Evolution doesn't necessarily produce minds that get things right. It doesn't necessarily produce animals who have true beliefs about the world. It produces animals that can effectively navigate their environments, effectively survive and reproduce, but that could be achieved by lots of different kinds of approximation, and it could be achieved by lots of different mechanisms other than getting things right or being right about things when one thinks about them. So if you believe that it was just evolution that produced us rather than God, you have even more reason to believe that our beliefs about math and logic are not accurate, that they're not actually getting the world right, they're just kind of accidents of our evolution. And at this point, Descartes says, but eventually I'm forced to admit that there is nothing among the things I once believed to be true which it is not permissible to doubt, and not out of frivolity or lack of forethought, but for valid and considered arguments. Thus I must be no less careful to withhold assent henceforth, even from these beliefs, than I would from those that are patently false if I wish to find anything certain. In other words, he's concluding at this point, I don't know for certain that math and logic are reliable. I don't know for certain that there is a God. I don't know for certain anything based on my senses. So it seems like I know nothing for certain.